Sometimes loneliness becomes your closest companion. Sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you what it feels like to be alive again. Willa Thorne spent 10 years alone in the Northern Divide Mountains. She trapped, traded, and survived where most folks couldn't last a week. Then Jesse Calder rode up her trail with dust on his boots and trouble following behind. She looked at him and said the truth plain. "I haven't seen a man in 10 years. They kissed like it meant something and married by sunset. But Jesse brought danger with him. Men were hunting him, and now they'd come for her mountain too. What happens when a woman who survived everything alone suddenly has something worth fighting for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The morning light filtered through the thick canopy of pine and aspen, casting long shadows across Willa Thorne's homestead. She stood on her cabin's front porch, coffee steaming in her weathered hands, watching the stranger who'd changed everything sleep peacefully in her bed. Jesse Calder. Even his name felt foreign on her tongue after a decade of speaking only to herself and the occasional trading post merchant. Her leather-bound journal lay open on the rough-hewn table beside her rocker, pages filled with 10 years of careful observations. Weather patterns, animal migrations, trap locations, trading records, the meticulous documentation of a woman who'd learned that survival meant paying attention to every detail. The journal had been her companion through countless lonely evenings, a witness to her transformation from grieving widow to self-sufficient mountain dweller. October 15th, 2013. First snow came early this year. Found wolf tracks near the South Ridge. Need to move the snares closer to home. March 22nd, 2014. Successfully treated a wounded elk calf. Released it near the creek. Sometimes I wonder if I'm more comfortable with wild things than I ever was. With people. August 8th, 2018. 10 pounds of salt pork traded for winter supplies. Old Pete at the trading post asked if I ever get lonely. Told him lonely's just another kind of quiet. The entries chronicled not just her daily survival, but her gradual acceptance of solitude. She'd come to these mountains broken, seeking nothing more than a place to disappear. Her husband David's death in Afghanistan had shattered something fundamental inside her. The belief that love was worth the inevitable pain of loss. The military had offered counseling, survivor benefits, even job placement. She'd taken the insurance money and vanished instead. The Northern Divide had seemed like the edge of the world when she'd first arrived. 40 acres of untamed wilderness, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through treacherous switchbacks and creek crossings that flooded every spring. The previous owner had been a prospector who died of a heart attack, leaving behind a basic cabin and not much else. It was perfect for someone who wanted to be forgotten. Those first winters had nearly killed her. She'd arrived with city survival skills and romantic notions about mountain living. Reality had been brutal. Frozen pipes, failed generators, spoiled food stores, and the terrible silence that pressed in from all sides. She'd learned to trap by trial and error, studied edible plants until she could identify them in her sleep, and gradually developed the instincts that kept her alive when the mercury dropped to 20 below. Now, watching Jesse sleep, she marveled at how easily she'd let him into this carefully constructed world. He'd ridden up yesterday afternoon like something out of a Western novel, tall in the saddle, hat tilted low, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Most folks who found their way up here were lost tourists or over-eager hunters. Jesse had dismounted like a man who knew exactly where he was. "Ma'am," he'd said, touching his hat brim, "name's Jesse Calder. Wonder if you might spare some water for my horses and maybe directions to the nearest town." She'd studied him from her porch, noting the way he kept his hands visible, the respectful distance he maintained, the genuine weariness in his eyes. After 10 years alone, she could read people's intentions faster than most folks could form them. Jesse Calder was running from something, but he wasn't dangerous, at least not to her. "Water's free," she'd replied. Towns 40 miles down mountain through Devil's Canyon, trails washed out in 3 places, and you won't make it before dark." He'd nodded, unsurprised. "Reckon I might ask to water and rest here tonight then? I can pay, and I'm handy with repairs if you've got work needs doing." That's when she'd said it, the words that surprised them both. "I haven't seen a man in 10 years. She hadn't meant it as an invitation, just a statement of fact. But something in his eyes had shifted, and before she knew what she was doing, she'd stepped off the porch and kissed him. Not gentle or tentative, but firm and sure, like staking a claim. He'd kissed her back with the same certainty, his hands, gentle on her face, and suddenly the decade of solitude felt like preparation rather than exile. "Well then," he'd said when they broke apart, "guess I'd better stay." By sunset, they'd exchanged vows in front of her wood-burning stove, using her husband's wedding ring as a makeshift ceremony. It should have felt rushed or crazy, but instead, it felt inevitable, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Now, in the morning light, she tried to make sense of what she'd done. Jesse stirred in the bed, and she watched him wake slowly, taking in his surroundings with the careful awareness of a man accustomed to danger. He was younger than her by maybe 5 years, putting him somewhere in his early 40s, with the weathered skin of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. His dark hair was going grey at the temples, and lines around his eyes spoke of squinting against sun and wind. "Morning, wife," he said, his voice rough with sleep but carrying a smile. The word sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Morning, husband. Coffee's hot." He dressed quickly and joined her on the porch, accepting the mug she offered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the peaks. It felt natural, like they'd been sharing morning coffee for years instead of hours. "This is some place you've built here," Jesse said eventually, his eyes taking in the well-organized homestead. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, backed against a rock face that provided shelter from the worst winter winds. She'd expanded it over the years, adding a workshop, smokehouse and root cellar. Solar panels powered essential equipment, while a generator provided backup. The creek that ran along the eastern edge supplied fresh water year-round. "Took some doing," she admitted. "First few years I nearly starved 3 times and froze twice, but the mountain teaches you, if you're willing to listen. What brought you up here?" She'd expected the question, but it still caught her off guard. Most folks who ended up in places like this had reasons they preferred not to discuss. But Jesse had a way of asking that felt genuine rather than intrusive. "My husband died overseas," she said simply. "Military. I needed somewhere to figure out how to live without him." Jesse nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago. What about you? What brings a cowboy to my mountain with trouble on his heels?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Got mixed up in a land deal that went sideways. Turns out the man I was working for wasn't as honest as he claimed. When I tried to back out, he made sure I couldn't just walk away clean." "What kind of land deal?" "Ranch land down in Colorado. Beautiful spread, perfect for cattle. Owner was desperate to sell. Price was almost too good to be true." He paused, staring into his coffee. "Turns out it was. The seller didn't actually own the land, and my boss knew it. By the time I figured out I was part of a fraud, there were buyers, out serious money and looking for someone to blame. And that someone was you. Seemed convenient for everyone involved. My boss had lawyers and connections. I had a reputation for straight dealing that made me the perfect fall guy." Jesse's voice carried bitter experience. "Amazing how fast a good name can turn into a liability when the wrong people start spreading stories." Willa studied his profile, noting the way his shoulders carried tension even in this peaceful moment. She recognized the look. It was the same expression she'd worn for years after David's death, the wariness of someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary. "How far behind are they?" she asked. Jesse looked surprised by the question. "You're not asking if I'm telling the truth. I spent 20 years married to a soldier. I know the difference between a liar and a man in trouble through no fault of his own." She met his eyes directly. How far behind? Maybe a day, maybe two. They're good, but they don't know this country like I'm learning to. And now you're here, on my mountain, with my water and my coffee." Her tone was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "What's your plan?" "Honestly, I was hoping to lose them in the high country, maybe find a way through to Canada, but that was before—" He gestured between them, unable to find words for what had happened. "Before you married a mountain woman who doesn't run from anything," she finished. "I won't bring trouble to your door, Willa. I can leave right now." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. The smart thing would be to send him away, return to her carefully constructed solitude, and let him face whatever was coming alone. That's what the old Willa would have done. The woman who'd fled civilization rather than risk another loss. But something had changed in that moment when she'd kissed him. Maybe it was 10 years of learning that running from pain didn't make it disappear. Maybe it was recognizing something in Jesse's eyes that matched the loneliness she'd been carrying. Or maybe it was simply that she was tired of being afraid. "This is my home," she said finally. "And you're my husband now. That means your trouble is my trouble." She stood, decision made. "Finish your coffee. We've got work to do." Jesse looked up at her, surprise and something deeper flickering across his features. "Willa, you don't understand what you're signing up for. These men, they're not just angry investors. They're professionals. Good thing I'm professional too." She met his gaze steadily. 10 years ago, I came up here to hide. But hiding and being helpless aren't the same thing. I've been preparing for something like this my whole life. I just didn't know what it would look like when it arrived." As if to punctuate her words, the distant sound of horses echoed up from the valley below. Both of them froze, listening. The sound faded, but the message was clear. They were no longer alone on the mountain. Jesse stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip where a gun would rest. "Looks like we're out of time for planning." "Then it's good we don't need much time." Willa moved toward the cabin door, her movement suddenly crisp and purposeful. "Come on, husband, let me show you what 10 years of mountain living really taught me." Inside the cabin, Willa moved with practiced efficiency, pulling supplies from hidden compartments Jesse hadn't even noticed. She retrieved a pair of binoculars from behind a false panel in the wall, then opened what appeared to be a simple wooden chest to reveal a sophisticated radio setup. "How long have you known they were coming?" Jesse asked, watching her work. "Since yesterday afternoon, about an hour before you arrived." She adjusted the radio's frequency. 3 riders came through Devil's Canyon, asking questions at the trading post. "Old Pete sent word up the mountain." She glanced at him. "Figured you might be running from something, but I didn't know what until now." Jesse stared at her, pieces clicking into place. "You knew, and you still married you? Still decided to stand and fight?" Willa powered down the radio and faced him. "Jesse, I've been alone on this mountain for 10 years. A woman doesn't survive that long in this country without learning to read situations fast and act decisively." She moved to another hidden panel, this one revealing a collection of items that made Jesse's breath catch: maps, surveillance equipment, and something that looked distinctly military. But what held his attention was the weathered wanted poster. She pulled from the collection, his own face staring back at him in stark black and white. $25,000, Willa read from the poster, "for information leading to the arrest of Jesse Calder in connection with land fraud and the murder of Thomas Henderson." She looked up at him. "Murder, Jesse? You didn't mention murder." Jesse's face went pale. "Because I didn't kill anyone. Tom Henderson was my partner in this whole mess. He's the one who figured out we were being set up. Last I saw him, he was alive and planning to take evidence to the authorities." "When was that?" 3 days ago. "We were supposed to meet in Denver, but he never showed." Jesse's voice cracked slightly. "If he's dead, it's because he was going to clear my name." Willa studied the poster, then looked back at Jesse. In 10 years of mountain living, she'd become expert at reading people's intentions, their honesty, their capacity for violence. What she saw in Jesse's eyes was grief and fear, but not guilt. Whoever's behind this is thorough, she said finally. They're not just chasing you, they're making... Sure, you can't run anywhere without someone recognizing your face. Which is why I need to keep moving, get as far from civilization as possible. Jesse reached for the poster, but Willa pulled it back. Or, she said slowly, we figure out who's really behind Tom Henderson's death and why they want you to take the blame. Willa, you don't understand. These aren't just angry investors or local law enforcement. The men tracking me, they're professionals, military contractors probably, the kind of people who solve problems permanently. She walked to the window, using the binoculars to scan the trail leading up from the valley. I can see them now. 3 riders, just like Pete said. They're moving slow, checking the ground for tracks. She lowered the glasses. They'll be here in about 2 hours. Then I need to leave now. Take the back trail through the high pass. That trail's been washed out since the spring floods. You'd never make it, especially not with winter coming. On. Willa turned from the window, her expression resolute. Besides, I told you, your trouble is my trouble now. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She moved to a trunk beneath her bed, retrieving items that made Jesse's estimation of her undergo a radical shift. Combat boots, field gear, and equipment that spoke of serious military training. My husband wasn't just any soldier, Jesse. He was Special Forces. And before I came to this mountain to grieve, I spent 5 years as a military contractor myself. Jessie stared as she began changing into gear that transformed her from mountain woman to something altogether more dangerous. What kind of contractor? The kind that taught me how to read terrain, set up defensive positions, and handle situations exactly like this one. She pulled on a tactical vest with the same efficiency she'd used to make coffee that morning. The kind that knows the difference between running from a fight and choosing the ground where you make your stand. Why didn't you tell me this last night? Same reason you didn't mention the murder charge. Some things are better revealed when they become necessary. Willa secured the last of her gear and faced him. The question now is whether you trust me enough to let me help you, or whether you're going to run into those mountains and die of exposure trying to avoid a fight you can't win. Jesse looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Since arriving, the soft-spoken mountain woman was still there, but underneath was something steel-hard and utterly competent. What are you proposing? Information first. We need to know exactly who's hunting you and why. Then we plan accordingly. She moved back to the radio, powering it up again. I've got contacts who can help us figure out the truth about Tom Henderson's death. Contacts? 10 years of mountain living doesn't mean 10 years of complete isolation. There are people, former military, contractors, folks who understand that sometimes the system fails good people. Her fingers worked the radio controls with practiced ease. People who know how to find truth when lies are professionally constructed. The radio crackled to life, and Willa began speaking in coded phrases that told Jesse she was far more connected to the outside world than he'd imagined. While she worked, he studied the wanted poster again, noting details he'd missed in his initial shock. The photo was recent, taken from his driver's license, probably. But the details about the alleged crime were vague, almost generic. Armed and dangerous was standard language, but the specifics of the fraud were oddly lacking. It read like something assembled quickly by people more concerned with results than accuracy. Marcus, I need a favor, Willa was saying into the radio. Tom Henderson, murdered 3 days ago, probably in Denver, connected to land fraud case involving Jesse Calder. I need to know who's really behind this. A gravelly voice responded through the static. Willa? Thought you'd gone completely hermit. On us. How deep you want me to dig? Deep enough to find bedrock. And Marcus, I need it fast. We've got company coming. How long do you have? Willa checked the window again. Maybe 90 minutes before they reach the cabin. I'll call in some favors. Give me 30 minutes. The radio went quiet, and Willa turned back to Jesse. Now we wait, and we plan. You're really going to do this? Stand and fight for a man you met yesterday? She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains that had been her refuge for so long. "Jesse, when I came up here 10 years ago, I thought I was running toward safety. Turns out I was running toward exactly this moment, the moment when I'd have to decide whether to keep hiding or remember who I used to be." "And who did you used to be?" "Someone who didn't leave people behind when they needed help. Someone who understood that some fights are worth having, even when the odds are bad." She met his eyes. "Someone who knew that love is worth fighting, for even when it scares you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, despite their dangerous circumstances. Jesse felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went beyond physical attraction or desperate circumstance. "What do we do if your contact confirms they're professionals?" he asked. "Then we make sure this mountain becomes the last place they ever visit." Willa's voice carried quiet certainty. "I've spent 10 years learning every trail, every cave, every advantage this terrain offers. If they want to fight on my ground, they're going to get one they'll never forget." Outside, the distant sound of horses grew slightly closer, and both of them knew their time for preparation was running short. 25 minutes later, Marcus's voice crackled through the radio with news that changed everything. Tom Henderson was found shot execution style in a Denver warehouse, Marcus reported. But here's the interesting part. Security cameras caught 3 men leaving the scene, military bearing, professional gear. And Willa, the warehouse belonged to Meridian Development Corporation. Jesse's face went grim. "That's the company behind the land deal. Richard Castellanos is the CEO. Gets better," Marcus continued. Henderson had been gathering evidence against Meridian for months. Bank records, forged documents, communications, enough to bring down a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. Word is, he was set to meet with federal investigators the next day. Willa exchanged glances with Jesse. "So they killed him and framed Jesse to tie up loose ends." "Looks that way. But there's more. Meridian's been buying up land all through Colorado and Wyoming. Always the same pattern. Questionable deals, displaced sellers, properties that end up being worth far more than anyone realized." "What kind of properties?" "The kind sitting on mineral rights. Rare earth deposits, specifically. The Pentagons. Been quietly identifying strategic reserves, and somehow Meridian always knows exactly which properties to target." Jesse felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Inside information. Someone's feeding them intelligence. "That's my guess. And Jesse, the men hunting you aren't just contractors. They're ex-military with specialized training in asset recovery and problem elimination. You're not just a loose end. You're a liability they can't afford to leave alive." The radio went silent for a moment before Marcus added, "Willa, whatever you're planning, these aren't the kind of men who give up easy." "Good thing I don't either," she replied. "Thanks, Marcus. I owe you. Stay alive. And we'll call it even." Willa switched off the radio and turned to Jesse, who was staring at the wanted poster with new understanding. "It's bigger than I thought," he said quietly. "They're not just covering up one bad deal. They're protecting an entire operation, which means they'll do whatever it takes to make sure you disappear permanently." Willa moved to another hidden panel in the cabin wall. This one revealing something that made Jesse's breath catch. "Good thing I've been preparing for company." Behind the false wall lay an arsenal that spoke of serious military preparation. Rifles, handguns, ammunition, and equipment Jesse recognized from his own brief military service. But more impressive than the weapons was the organization. Everything was clean, maintained, and ready for immediate use. "Jesus, Willa, how long have you been planning for war?" "Not war, survival." She began selecting items with practiced efficiency. "When I came up here, I told myself I was done with violence. But I also knew that being isolated didn't mean being helpless. Every year I added a little more to my preparations." She handed him a rifle, a military-grade weapon that felt perfectly balanced in his hands. "You know how to use this." "Army taught me, but that was 20 years ago. It comes back fast when you need it to." Willa slung her own weapon across her shoulder. "But first, let me show you the real advantage we have." She led him outside to what appeared to be a simple root cellar built into the hillside behind the cabin. But when she opened the heavy wooden door, Jesse found himself looking at something much more sophisticated. The cellar had been expanded into a tunnel system that extended deep into the mountain, complete with ventilation, lighting, and multiple exits. "Started this the second year I was here," Willa explained as they moved through the main tunnel. "Told myself it was for storage and winter access, but really I was building a fortress." The tunnels were impressive, hand-carved but professionally reinforced, with storage areas for supplies and weapons. More importantly, they connected to natural cave systems that honeycombed the mountain, creating a defensive network that would be nearly impossible for outsiders to navigate. "How extensive is this?" 3 main tunnels, 7 exit points, and connections to caves that go all the way through to the other side of the mountain. Willa's voice carried quiet pride. "Took me 8 years to complete, working mostly in winter. When I had time." They emerged from a concealed exit nearly 200 yards from the cabin, behind a natural rock formation that provided perfect cover. Jesse could see the entire approach trail from this position, while remaining completely invisible to anyone below. "My husband always said the key to defensive strategy was controlling the terrain," Willa said, settling into what was clearly a prepared fighting position. "Make the enemy come to you on your terms." "Your husband sounds like he was a smart man." "He was. David taught me that surviving isn't about avoiding danger. It's about being ready when danger finds you." She adjusted the scope on her rifle, checking sightlines. "I've been ready for 10 years. I just never expected the danger to come with a husband attached." Jesse felt something tighten in his chest at the casual way she said, "husband." It should have felt strange. They'd known each other less than 24 hours. Instead, it felt right, like a truth he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. "Willa, when this is over, we'll figure out what comes next," she interrupted gently. "But right now, we focus on making sure there is a when. This is over." She was right, but Jesse needed to say something while he still could. "I need you to know. What happened between us last night, what's happening now, it's not desperation or convenience. I've been running for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want to stop somewhere. And now I want to stop here, with you, for as long as you'll have me." Willa was quiet for a moment, studying his face in the filtered sunlight. "Ask me again, when we're not about to fight for our lives. Promise you'll give me the chance." "To ask again? I promise to do everything in my power to make sure we both survive to have that conversation." She returned to checking her weapon. "Now, let's talk strategy. They'll approach from the main trail. It's the only way up that's passable for horses. The trail funnels through that narrow gap between those 2 rock formations." Jesse studied the terrain with new appreciation for its tactical advantages. "Natural kill zone." "Exactly. They'll have to come through single file, and there's no cover once they commit to the approach." Willa pointed to specific positions. "I've got firing positions prepared at 3 different elevations. Even if they spot one, they won't see the others until it's too late." "What about escape routes? If we need to fall back, the tunnel system gives us options they can't predict or follow." "But Jesse?" She met his eyes with steady resolve. "I'm not planning to run. This is my home, our home now, and I'm not giving it up without a fight." The sound of horses drew their attention back to the valley below. 3 riders had emerged from the tree line, moving with the careful precision of professionals. Even at distance, Jesse could see they were well-equipped and alert. "There they are," Willa said, raising her binoculars. "Professional bearing, military-grade equipment, and they're taking their time to assess before committing." "You're to the approach. Can you see their faces?" "Not clearly, but I can see enough to know Marcus was right. These aren't just hired guns, they're specialists." She lowered the glasses. "The question is whether they know what they're walking into." As if in answer to her question, the lead rider dismounted and began studying the ground with obvious expertise, reading signs that would tell him exactly who had passed this way and when. Tracker, Jesse observed. Good one too, but tracking skills won't help him much once he's committed to that approach trail. Willa smiled grimly. Time to see just how professional they really are. Back at the cabin, Willa retrieved a hand-drawn map from her most secure hiding place, a waterproof case buried beneath the floorboards of her workshop. The map showed details that would be invisible to outsiders, but crucial for anyone defending this terrain. "This is why they'll never take this mountain," she said, spreading the map on her kitchen table. Jesse studied the intricate drawings, amazed by the level of detail. Every trail, every cave entrance, every defensive position had been carefully marked and annotated. "How long did this take you to map?" 10 years of exploration. Every winter when the snows trapped me here, I'd work on extending the cave system or finding new routes through the rock." Her finger traced paths that seemed to connect impossible points. The old miners who worked this area in the 1800s knew what they were doing. "They left us a highway system, if you know how to read it." Jesse noted the careful markings indicating elevation changes, water sources, and what appeared to be supply caches. "You've been preparing for this specific scenario." "I've been preparing for any scenario where I might need to defend this place." Willa rolled up the map carefully. "After David died, I swore I'd never be helpless again, never be in a position where I couldn't protect what mattered to me. And now something matters to you again." She met his eyes directly. "Someone does." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable despite their dangerous circumstances. Jesse reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Willa!" The sound of approaching horses cut him short. Through the window, they could see the 3 riders had begun their ascent of the main trail, moving with professional caution, but clear determination. "Time to go," Willa said, gathering essential supplies. "Once they reach the cabin and find it empty, they'll start searching the area systematically. We need to be in position before they get that far." They moved through the tunnel system to the primary observation post, a carefully concealed position that offered commanding views of all approaches to the homestead. Jesse was impressed by the sophistication of what Willa had built, not just the tunnels, but the entire defensive network. "Military engineering," he observed. David's specialty was asymmetric warfare, making small forces effective against larger, better-equipped enemies. "He taught me that terrain is everything, and preparation is the difference between survival and surrender." Willa checked her rifle one more time. "These mountains are my terrain now." Through her binoculars, she watched the 3 men approach. The cabin. They moved with the coordinated precision of a practiced team, covering each other and checking for threats. When they reached the homestead, their leader, a tall man with graying hair and military bearing, signaled for a methodical search. "Professional," Jesse admitted, watching their movements. "They know what they're doing, so do we." Willa tracked the leader's movements as he examined the cabin's exterior. "Look how he's reading the sign around the building. He knows we're here somewhere." The man Jesse was watching suddenly straightened, having found something that caught his attention. He called his teammates over, and all 3 began studying the ground near the cabin's front door. What did he find? Probably our tracks from this morning. But more importantly, he's realizing this isn't just a simple mountain cabin. Willa's voice carried grim satisfaction. "Look at how he's examining the solar panels, the radio antenna, the defensive sight lines. He's starting to understand he's not dealing with an amateur." As if to confirm her assessment, the team leader began issuing orders that sent his men to establish a perimeter around the immediate area. They were no longer treating this as a simple retrieval operation. "They're adapting to the situation," Jesse said. "That's going to make them more dangerous, or more predictable. Professional training creates patterns, and patterns can be exploited." Willa shifted position, maintaining visual contact while staying concealed. "Watch their movement patterns. They're good, but they're operating from assumptions about how mountain terrain works." She was right. The 3 men were conducting their search based on standard tactical doctrine, which assumed certain principles about cover, concealment, and likely hiding places. But Willa's defensive preparations had been designed specifically to exploit those assumptions. They'll check the obvious places first, she explained quietly. The workshop, the root cellar, the immediate tree line. When they don't find us there, they'll expand their search radius systematically. How long before they find the tunnel entrances? If they're really good, maybe an hour. But finding the entrances won't help them much if they don't understand. And how the system connects. Willa smiled grimly. And by then, we'll have other advantages in play. She was referring to preparations Jesse was only beginning to understand. Throughout their morning planning, Willa had made several radio calls to contacts he hadn't met, arranging what she called insurance policies. He was starting to suspect that her network of support was more extensive than she'd initially revealed. Willa, exactly how many people know about your situation up here? Enough. She kept her binoculars focused on their pursuers. 10 years of mountain living doesn't mean 10 years of complete isolation. There are folks who check on me, help with supplies, keep an eye on things when I'm away trading. And these folks, they're people who understand that sometimes good folks need help dealing with bad situations. Her tone suggested he shouldn't ask for more specifics. The kind of people who don't ask too many questions, but can be counted on when things get serious. Jesse was beginning to realize that Willa's decade of mountain living had been far more strategic than he'd initially understood. She hadn't just been hiding. She'd been building something. A life, a network, a fortress that could stand against. Exactly the kind of threat they were facing now. One of the searchers below had found the concealed entrance to the root cellar, and Jesse watched him signal the others before disappearing inside. He emerged a few minutes later, clearly communicating that he'd found the tunnel system. They know about the tunnels now, Jesse reported. Good. That means they're about to learn why those tunnels were built. Willa began moving toward a different position, one that would give them tactical advantage once the search moved underground. Jesse, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change how you think about the woman you married yesterday. What do you mean? I mean, the peaceful mountain woman you met was real, but she was only part of the story. The other part is someone I thought I'd left behind when I came up here. Willa's voice carried a weight Jesse hadn't heard before. Someone I hoped I'd never need to be again. She led him through a section of the tunnel system he hadn't seen before, toward equipment and preparations that would reveal just how thoroughly she'd been ready for this day. The section of tunnel Willa led him to contained equipment that transformed Jesse's understanding of everything. Communication gear that belonged in a military command center, surveillance monitors showing feeds from cameras he'd never noticed, and weapons that spoke of serious combat preparation. But what caught his attention most was a simple silver ring, sitting on a small shelf carved into the rock wall, clearly placed there with reverence. That was David's, Willa said, noticing his gaze. His grandfather's ring, passed down through 4 generations of soldiers. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm. I couldn't bring myself to bury it with him. Felt like I was burying the part of him that taught me to fight. Jesse watched as she slipped the ring onto her finger. Not her wedding finger, but her right hand, like a talisman. You've been wearing his memory as armor, and now I'm wearing it as a promise. She met his eyes. To him, to you, to myself, that I won't lose someone I love because I wasn't strong enough to fight for them. The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by sounds from the surveillance monitors. The 3 pursuers had split up, with one entering the tunnel system while the other 2 maintained overwatch positions. The man underground was moving cautiously but competently, using military tactics for tunnel exploration. He knows what he's doing, Jesse observed, but he doesn't know where he's doing it. Willa activated a control panel that Jesse was beginning to suspect connected to more than just lights and ventilation. These tunnels have been my project for 8 years. Every passage, every turn, every potential ambush point. The monitor showed their pursuer reaching a junction where 3 tunnels diverged. He paused, clearly weighing his options, then began marking his path with small chemical lights, standard procedure for underground navigation. Smart, Willa admitted. He's making sure he can find his way back out. Can we cut off his retreat? We can do better than that. She activated another control, and Jesse heard the distant sound of rock moving. Remote-controlled barriers. I can seal off sections of the tunnel system if necessary. Jesse stared at her. You built a fortress with mechanical defenses. I built a home I could defend against anything. Her voice carried quiet pride. David always said the best defense wasn't just superior firepower. It was superior preparation combined with intimate knowledge of your ground. On the monitor, their pursuer had reached one of the barriers Willa had just activated. He studied the obstacle, then began working to circumvent it. His movements showed professional demolitions training. He's going to blast through that. Let him. It'll take time, make noise, and funnel him exactly where I want him to go. Willa's fingers moved across the control panel like a pianist playing a familiar piece. Every barrier he removes gives me more information about his capabilities and intentions. The sound of the explosion echoed through the mountain, muffled but distinct. Above ground, Jesse could see the other two men reacting to the blast, repositioning themselves to maintain security while their teammate worked below. They're disciplined, he admitted, not panicking, not rushing to help. They trust their teammate to handle the underground situation. Good. That means they'll stick to their plan instead of adapting to ours. Willa switched to a different camera feed, showing the area immediately around the cabin, but they're also calling for backup. Jesse looked where she was pointing. One of the men was speaking into a radio, his body language suggesting he was reporting the situation to someone in authority. How long before reinforcements arrive? Depends on where they're coming from. If they staged additional teams in the valley, maybe an hour. If they're coming from Denver, we've got until tomorrow morning. Willa's voice remained calm, but Jesse could see the calculations running behind her eyes. Either way, we need to resolve this before it becomes a siege. What do you have in mind? Instead of answering directly, Willa led him to another section of the tunnel system, one that emerged behind the cabin in a position that would be invisible to the men maintaining Overwatch. From here, they could observe their adversaries without being detected. The leader's name is Mitchell, she said, studying him through binoculars. Former Marine, probably Force Recon based on his movement patterns. The younger one is Henderson. No. Relation to your partner, Tom, I'm guessing. The one in the tunnels is Rodriguez, demolition specialist. How do you know all that? Because while you were processing the situation, I was making calls. Willa's network was proving more extensive than Jesse had imagined. My contacts ran their faces through some databases. These men work for Blackwater-type organizations, private military contractors who specialize in asset recovery and problem elimination, meaning they're not here to arrest you or take you back for questioning. They're here to make sure you disappear permanently, along with anyone who might have information that could threaten their employer. The weight of that settled over Jesse. They're here to kill both of us, which simplifies our tactical situation considerably. Willa's voice carried a grim satisfaction. No need to worry about capturing anyone alive or preserving evidence. This is a straight elimination scenario, which means we respond accordingly. Jesse studied her profile, seeing something he'd only glimpsed before. This wasn't just the mountain woman he'd married, or even the former military contractor she'd revealed herself to be. This was someone who'd operated in the world of organized violence and knew its rules intimately. What exactly did you do during your contracting years? Asset protection, threat elimination, and small unit tactics in hostile environments. Her answer was matter of fact, but Jesse heard depths beneath it. I was good at keeping people alive who needed to stay alive, and stopping people who needed to be stopped. The radio in her equipment setup crackled to life. A voice Jesse didn't recognize spoke in careful code words, reporting positions and status. Willa responded with equal professionalism. and Jesse realized he was listening to a coordinated operation that involved more than just the two of them. "Willa, exactly how many people are you in contact with?" "Enough to make sure this ends today, one way or another." She checked her watch. Mitchell and his team made one crucial mistake. They assumed they were hunting an isolated target in remote terrain. They didn't consider that isolated doesn't necessarily mean alone. Through the binoculars, Jesse could see Mitchell receiving a radio call of his own. His body language changed, becoming more alert and focused. Whatever he was hearing, it was changing his tactical assessment. "He's getting new intelligence," Jesse observed. "Good. That means he's starting to understand what he's really walked into." Willa smiled. And for the first time since meeting her, Jesse saw something genuinely dangerous in her expression. Time to show these professionals what 10 years of preparation looks like when it's properly motivated. The emergency radio Willa had hidden in the deepest part of the tunnel system crackled to life with a transmission that changed everything. The voice was calm, professional, and speaking in the kind of code that meant serious people were taking serious action. "Mountain base, this is Overwatch. Package is confirmed, situation is escalating. Authorization for field intervention is approved. Repeat, you are cleared for defensive action with full support." Jesse watched Willa respond with equal professionalism. "Overwatch, mountain base copies. Hostiles are professional grade, 3 confirmed, possible reinforcements en route. Request priority intelligence on employer and operational scope. Stand by for intelligence brief." Willa turned to Jesse, her expression mixing determination with something that might have been regret. "There's something I need to tell you about. Why I really came to this mountain." "What do you mean?" "David's death wasn't just a combat casualty. He was killed because he stumbled onto something that threatened people with serious power, people who make problems disappear professionally." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't just come up here to grieve. I came here because staying in civilization meant being a target." Jesse felt pieces clicking into place. "The same kind of people who are hunting me now. Exactly the same kind of people. Government contracts, private military operations, corporate interests that use violence to solve business problems." Willa's voice carried old anger. "David found evidence of illegal arms sales, funds being diverted from military contracts, operations that violated every rule of engagement we'd sworn to uphold. And they killed him for it. They tried to make it look like enemy action, but David had taught me how to read after-action reports. The details didn't add up." Her jaw tightened. "By the time I figured out what had really happened, the investigation was closed and the evidence had disappeared." The radio crackled again. "Mountain base. Intelligence brief follows. Meridian. Development Corporation has connections to Blackwater successor organizations. Current operation is privately funded, off books, with government contracts providing cover. Your situation is part of a pattern. They've eliminated 17 potential witnesses over the past 5 years." Jesse's blood ran cold. 17 people, all connected to land deals, mineral rights, or military contracting irregularities, all classified as accidents, suicides, or random violence. Willa's voice was steady, but Jesse could see the fury burning in her eyes. "This isn't just about framing you for Tom Henderson's murder. This is about protecting a multi-billion-dollar operation that depends on keeping certain people quiet permanently." The surveillance monitor showed Rodriguez emerging from the tunnel system, clearly reporting to Mitchell about what he'd found below ground. Their conversation was brief but animated, with hand gestures that suggested the underground situation had been more complicated than expected. "He found your defenses," Jesse observed. "He found some of them, but he also triggered sensors that told me exactly where he went and how he moves." Willa activated another control panel, bringing online systems Jesse hadn't known existed. Every step he took down there was recorded and analyzed. The monitors now showed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the mountain's natural defensive positions. Jesse could see not only the three professionals who'd been hunting him, but also movement in the forest that suggested additional forces were already moving into position. Backups arriving faster than expected, he said, because they're not. Incoming from Denver, they've been staged in the area, probably for days. Willa's assessment was delivered with professional calm. This was never a tracking operation. It was a coordinated elimination mission. Jesse studied the new arrivals. Through the monitor feeds, at least 6 additional men, all moving with military precision, all carrying equipment that suggested they were prepared for extended operations. 9 against 2, he said. 9 against more than 2. Willa smiled, and Jesse heard satisfaction in her voice. Overwatch, Mountain Base requests immediate activation of support assets. Mountain Base, support assets are moving to position. Estimate 12 minutes to full deployment. Jesse stared at her. How many people are involved in this? Enough. She began final preparations, checking weapons and equipment with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. David wasn't the only good soldier who died because he threatened the wrong people. Over the past 10 years, I've been in contact with families, fellow contractors, people who lost someone to these shadow operations. And they're all veterans mostly, military contractors, intelligence operatives, people with the skills and motivation to make sure these operations don't continue unchallenged. Willa's voice carried quiet pride. We call ourselves the Overwatch Network. When one of us is threatened, all of us respond. The radio provided a steady stream of updates as friendly forces moved into position around the mountain. Jesse began to understand that what had seemed like a remote confrontation was becoming something much larger. Mountain Base, be advised, target acquisition complete. Hostile forces are surrounded and have no viable escape routes. You are cleared to initiate contact when ready. Overwatch, Mountain Base copies. Beginning final phase now. Willa turned to Jesse and he saw in her expression the woman he'd fallen in love with alongside the professional warrior she'd trained to become. Jesse, what happens in the next few minutes is going to be violent and permanent. These men came here to kill us, and now they're going to die instead. Are you ready for that? Jesse thought about Tom Henderson, murdered for trying to expose corruption. About David, killed for threatening people who treated violence as a business tool. About 17 other people who died because they'd posed inconvenient threats to powerful interests. I'm ready, he said. Then let's end this. Willa activated her radio one final time. All Overwatch stations, Mountain Base is initiating final contact. Repeat, we are going active. Through the monitors, Jesse could see the hostile forces suddenly, realizing their situation had changed dramatically. Mitchell was shouting orders, his team scrambling to adapt to threats they hadn't seen coming. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten people who know how to fight back, Willa said, shouldering her rifle. And more importantly, they're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone I love. The word love hung between them for a moment, honest and powerful, despite their dangerous circumstances. Then Willa was moving, and Jesse was following, and their mountain fortress was about to become the place where a shadow war finally came into the light. The confrontation Jesse expected never came. Instead, Mitchell's voice echoed across the mountain through a loudspeaker, calm and professional, despite being surrounded. Willa Thorne, we need to talk. This isn't what you think it is. Jesse looked at Willa, seeing surprise flicker across her features for the first time since he'd known her. How does he know your real name? More importantly, why is he using negotiation tactics instead of trying to shoot his way out? Willa kept her rifle ready, but didn't immediately respond to Mitchell's call. We know about the Overwatch Network, Mitchell continued. We know about your husband, David. And we know about the land deed documents you've been hiding for the past 10 years. Jesse felt something cold settle in his stomach. What land deed documents? Willa's face had gone pale. She moved to a storage container Jesse hadn't noticed before, one that required both a key and a combination to open. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, were legal documents that made Jesse's breath catch. The papers were old, but carefully preserved. Mineral rights surveys, geological assessments, and ownership documents that showed Willa's 40 acres. Sat on one of the largest rare earth deposits in the continental United States, but more shocking were the dates and signatures. The surveys were recent, conducted just months before Jesse's arrival, and they were signed by officials from Meridian Development Corporation. Jesus, Willa, your land is worth approximately $400 million. Mitchell's voice carried across the mountain, somehow knowing exactly what they were discovering. Which is why we're not here to kill you, Ms. Thorne. We're here to make you an offer. Jesse stared at the documents, understanding flooding through him. This was never about me running from a land fraud. This was about getting me to lead them to you. The Tom Henderson murder, the wanted posters, the professional. Chase across 3 states, Mitchell continued, his voice maddeningly calm. All designed to drive Jesse Calder to the one place we needed to find, a property whose owner had been successfully hiding from us for a decade. Willa's hands were shaking as she held the geological survey. They've been looking for me. David didn't die because he discovered arms dealing or contract fraud, Mitchell's voice explained with clinical precision. He died because he discovered these mineral surveys and realized the government was secretly mapping strategic resources that certain private interests wanted to control before official discovery made them subject to federal oversight. Jesse felt pieces of a massive puzzle clicking into place. The land deals I was involved with, they were all test runs, weren't they? Practice for something much bigger. Meridian Development has spent 5 years perfecting the art of acquiring mineral-rich properties through fraud, intimidation, and when necessary, elimination of problematic owners. Mitchell paused, letting that sink in. You, Mr. Calder, were never the target. You were the hunting dog, trained to follow a scent trail that would lead us to the most valuable prize of all. Willa was studying the documents with growing horror. The geological data shows they've known about this deposit for years. They've been systematically acquiring surrounding properties, building a complex that would allow them to extract everything while hiding the true scope of the operation. Your 40 acres represent the final piece of a puzzle worth billions of dollars, Mitchell continued. Without access to your land, the entire extraction operation is impossible, which is why we've gone to such elaborate lengths to find you. Jesse looked at Willa, seeing her grapple with implications that went far beyond their personal situation. How long have you known about the mineral deposits? I didn't know. David found these surveys among his father's effects after the funeral. His father had been a geological consultant, and someone had hired him to assess this area back in the 1990s. Willa's voice was hollow with realization. I thought they were just old paperwork. I brought them up here and forgot about them. David's father wasn't just any geological consultant, Mitchell's voice revealed. He was the original discoverer of this deposit. And when he realized the strategic implications of what he'd found, he made copies of everything before his employers could suppress the information. The radio in Willa's command center crackled with updates from the Overwatch network. Mountain Base, be advised. We're seeing massive movement in the valley, military-grade vehicles, heavy equipment. This is much larger than we anticipated. Jesse moved to the surveillance monitors, seeing convoy after convoy of vehicles moving through the mountain passes, construction equipment, security forces, and what appeared to be mobile mining facilities. They're not just here to make an offer, he realized. They're here to begin extraction whether you agree or not. The offer is simple, Mitchell's voice continued. Sign over mineral rights to Meridian Development. Accept a generous compensation package and relocate anywhere in the world you choose. Your new husband's legal troubles disappear, you both live comfortably for the rest of your lives, and everyone walks away satisfied. And if we refuse, Willa called back, then the extraction begins anyway, and you discover that property rights become meaningless when national security interests are involved. Mitchell's tone remained professional, but the threat was clear. We have federal authorization to acquire this resource by any means necessary. Jesse studied the convoy movements on the monitors. National security authorization means they can claim eminent domain, doesn't it? Worse than that, it means they can classify the entire operation, which makes any resistance an act of domestic terrorism. Willa's voice carried grim understanding. They've turned us from victims into criminals just by fighting back. The Overwatch network coordinator's voice crackled through the radio. Mountain Base, intelligence update. Federal agencies have been notified of a terrorist cell operating in your area. Military assets are being repositioned to support law enforcement operations. Jesse felt the scope of their situation expanding beyond anything he could have imagined. They're not just stealing your land, they're using federal resources to do it and making us the criminals for resisting. David didn't just die because he found evidence of corruption, Willa said quietly, understanding spreading across her features. He died because he discovered a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the federal government. Mitchell's voice returned, patient but implacable. You have 30 minutes to consider our offer. After that, the situation becomes a federal law enforcement matter, and your options become considerably more limited. Willa looked at Jesse, then at the documents that had made them both targets in a game much larger than they'd understood. Jesse, what I'm about to tell you changes everything we thought we knew about why we're here and what we're fighting for. What do you mean? I mean, David didn't just hide these surveys before he died. He also hid something else, evidence that this mineral extraction operation is connected to weapons programs that violate international treaties. She moved to another hidden compartment, retrieving materials that would transform their personal fight into something with global implications. Evidence that's going to make us the most wanted people in America, assuming we live long enough to use it. Jesse stared at the new documents, realizing that their mountain fortress had become ground zero for a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and threatened to expose military programs worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So, the question becomes, Willa said, do we take their offer and disappear, or do we fight back knowing that we're not just fighting Meridian development, we're fighting elements of our own government? Outside, the sound of helicopters grew louder, and Jesse knew their time for decision was running out. Willa reached into the deepest hiding place she'd created, behind a false rock wall that had taken her 3 years to perfect. What she retrieved made Jesse's breath catch, her deceased husband's purple heart, wrapped carefully in the flag that had covered his coffin. But more importantly, attached to the medal was a data storage device that had been waiting 10 years for this moment. David knew he was going to die, she said quietly, holding the medal with reverence that spoke of a decade of grief. Before his last deployment, he gave me specific instructions. If anything happened to him, if the official story didn't match what he'd told me about his mission, I was to take this evidence and disappear until I could find people trustworthy, enough to help expose the truth. Jesse studied the small device, understanding its significance. What's on it? Financial records, communication intercepts, operational orders, proof that elements within the Pentagon have been using classified mineral surveys to guide private extraction operations. Billions of dollars in strategic resources being sold to corporations before Congress even knows they exist. Willa's voice carried 10 years of suppressed anger. David died because he was going to testify before a Senate subcommittee. The radio crackled with urgent updates from the Overwatch network. Mountain Base, federal response is escalating beyond previous estimates. We count military helicopters, National Guard units, and what appears to be specialized extraction teams. This is not a standard law enforcement operation. Jesse moved to the surveillance monitors, watching the massive buildup of forces surrounding their position. How many people are we talking about? Counting the private contractors, federal agents, and military support, probably over 200 personnel, Willa replied, her tactical assessment delivered with professional calm despite the overwhelming odds. They're treating this like a major counter-terrorism operation. Because that's exactly what they've classified it as, came Mitchell's voice through the loudspeaker, apparently monitoring their communications. Ms. Thorne, Mr. Calder, you're now considered domestic terrorists in possession of classified materials that threaten national security. Surrender is your only viable option. Willa activated her command center's primary communication system, connecting simultaneously to multiple networks she'd spent years establishing. Overwatch Network, Guardian Station, Liberty Archive. This is Mountain Base with priority alert. Evidence Package Alpha is being activated. Full disclosure protocols are now in effect. Jesse watched her work, amazed by the complexity of what she'd built. How many people are you connected to? Journalists, former military, intelligence analysts, congressional staffers, anyone who's been waiting for evidence solid enough to expose this level of corruption. Her fingers moved across. Keyboards and control panels like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. David died to protect this information. I've spent 10 years building a network that could disseminate it faster than they could suppress it. The radio brought confirmation that her network was responding. Mountain Base, Guardian Station confirms package receipt, distribution commencing. The primary media outlets, congressional oversight committees, and international monitoring organizations. Liberty Archive acknowledges cryptographic verification complete. Evidence is being uploaded to distributed servers globally. Jesse felt a mixture of awe and terror as he realized what Willa had just initiated. You're releasing everything? Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence David died to protect. She met his eyes with fierce determination. They wanted to corner us on this mountain. Fine. But they're about to discover that cornering someone doesn't mean silencing them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Through the surveillance monitors, they could see frantic radio activity among the federal forces, commanders clearly receiving new orders that were changing the entire operational profile. Mountain Base, all stations report successful distribution, came the coordinated response from her network. Evidence is now in the hands of the Washington Post, New York Times, Senate Intelligence Committee, and 12 international monitoring organizations. The story breaks in 6 hours, regardless of operational outcome. Mitchell's voice returned, but now carried urgency rather than calm negotiation. Ms. Thorne, what you've just done constitutes the largest breach of classified information in U.S. history. The response will be proportional to the threat. Good, Willa replied through her own loudspeaker. Let them respond. Let everyone see exactly how far they'll go to protect their illegal operations. Jesse watched the federal forces, repositioning, noting the change in their deployment patterns. They're not setting up for negotiation anymore. This is preparation for assault, which means we have maybe 30 minutes before they try to take this position by force. Willa began final preparations, activating systems Jesse was only now beginning to understand. Jesse, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change how you think about everything I've built up here. She led him to a section of the command center hidden behind what appeared to be solid rock. Behind it lay equipment that spoke of preparation for exactly this scenario. Not just defensive weapons, but broadcasting equipment, satellite uplinks, and communication systems that could reach anywhere in the world. I haven't just been hiding up here for 10 years, she said. I've been building the most sophisticated independent communication network in North America. When David's evidence goes public, it won't be through channels they can control or suppress. You built all this yourself? With help from people who understand that sometimes democracy requires citizens to take extraordinary measures to protect it from its own government. Willa activated systems that brought the mountain fortress fully online. Every person they've killed, every family they've destroyed, every operation they've hidden, it's all going to be exposed simultaneously from multiple sources they can't trace or stop. The radio brought updates that confirmed the scope of what was unfolding. Mountain base primary media outlets are moving to expedited publication schedules. Congressional leadership is demanding immediate briefings. International allies are requesting clarification of U.S. mineral extraction policies. Jesse realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. You're not just exposing one conspiracy, you're bringing down an entire shadow network. David always said the only way to fight corruption at this level was to make the cost of maintaining it higher than the cost of exposing it. Willa checked her weapons one final time, the Purple Heart now pinned to her tactical vest, where her husband's memory could guide her through what was coming. In about 25 minutes, these people are going to discover that killing us won't stop what we've started. It will only make the story bigger. Through the monitors, they could see the assault preparations reaching final stages. Federal forces were establishing perimeters, helicopters were positioning for insertion, and specialized equipment was being moved into place. They're going to try to take us alive, Jesse observed. Dead heroes make better martyrs than live criminals, probably. But alive or dead, the evidence is already beyond their reach. Willa moved to the final defensive position she'd prepared, one that would give them maximum tactical advantage when the assault began. The question is whether we go down fighting or find a way to survive long enough to see justice served. What do you recommend? I recommend we show them what happens when they threaten people who've been preparing for this fight their entire adult lives. She smiled, and Jesse saw in her expression the fierce love that had driven her decade of preparation. They wanted to corner us on this mountain. Let them try to take it. The radio crackled with a final update from the Overwatch network. Mountain base, all friendly assets are in final position. Support is ready when you initiate. Remember, the whole world is watching now. Jesse looked at Willa, seeing the woman he'd fallen in love with transformed into something magnificent and terrifying. A warrior prepared to fight for principles larger than her own survival. "Ready, husband?" she asked, the word carrying weight that encompassed everything they'd shared and everything they were about to risk. "Ready, wife," he replied, meaning it completely. Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters marked the beginning of the end of their mountain refuge, and the start of a battle that would determine whether truth or power would prevail. The assault began at dawn, with the thunder of helicopters and the systematic destruction of everything Willa had built above ground. But the real battle started when the first federal agents entered her tunnel system and discovered that 10 years of preparation meant more than hidden weapons and defensive positions. Jesse watched through the surveillance monitors as specialized teams rappelled from helicopters, only to find themselves facing obstacles they hadn't expected. Willa's mountain fortress wasn't just defensible, it was designed to turn an attacker's advantages into liabilities. "Avalanche charges," she said quietly, her hand hovering over controls that would reshape the battlefield permanently. "I planted them 7 years ago, telling myself they were for emergency avalanche control. But really, I was preparing for this exact moment." Through the monitors, they could see assault teams positioning for coordinated entry into multiple tunnel mouths. Professional, disciplined, overwhelming in their numbers and equipment, but moving into terrain that had been specifically prepared to neutralize those advantages. "How much of the mountain can you bring down?" Jesse asked. "Enough to seal every tunnel entrance and make this position impregnable for weeks." Willa's voice carried quiet determination. "But also enough to ensure we never leave this mountain alive." The first explosion wasn't from Willa's charges, it was federal forces blasting through one of her defensive barriers. The sound echoed through the tunnels, followed by the disciplined advance of a professional assault team. Through her sensors, they could track the team's progress as they moved deeper into the mountain. "They're good," Jesse admitted, watching. Their careful, coordinated movement, military precision, proper tunnel clearing techniques. But they're operating in my terrain, following paths I've had 8 years to prepare. Willa activated a sequence that began sealing secondary tunnels behind the advancing team. They can take ground, but they can't hold it if they can't retreat. To it, the radio crackled with updates from the assault teams. Alpha Team reports significant tunnel system, professionally constructed. Resistance appears minimal, but terrain is extremely challenging. That's because the resistance isn't coming from where they expect it, Willa said, activating another control sequence. Through the monitors, Jesse watched as carefully placed charges began collapsing tunnel sections, not to kill the advancing teams, but to trap them in areas where her defensive advantages would be greatest. You're not trying to stop them, he realized. You're channeling them into kill zones I've spent years preparing. She moved to her primary weapons position, one that commanded views of 3 different tunnel junctions. They can have the tunnels, as long as they understand that having them and surviving in them are 2 different things. The first direct contact came when Alpha Team reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Willa's defensive position allowed her to engage them from an angle they couldn't anticipate or effectively return fire against. Her first shots were precise, professional, designed to wound rather than kill. Warning shots, she called through. Her communication system, you're in a tactical disadvantage position. Withdraw now and no one needs to die. The response was immediate. Flashbang grenades and suppressive fire as Alpha Team attempted to locate and neutralize her position. But Jesse could see through the monitors that their return fire was hitting reinforced positions that had been designed to absorb exactly this kind of assault. They can't see you, can they? He said, firing ports designed to be invisible from their angle of approach. I can engage them, but they can't effectively engage me. Willa's next shots were equally precise, forcing the assault team to take cover in positions that exposed them to her secondary firing points. Classic asymmetric warfare turned superior numbers and equipment into liabilities instead of advantages. The radio brought reports of the team's growing awareness that they were facing something unexpected. Command, Alpha Team reports extremely sophisticated defensive positions. Target appears to have professional military engineering support. Professional military engineering support, Jesse repeated. They still don't understand they're fighting one woman who's had 10 years to prepare. Let them underestimate the situation. It works in our favor. Willa moved to another position, maintaining her ability to control the tunnel junction while avoiding the coordinated counter-assault she could see them preparing. Jesse, I need you to monitor the avalanche. Trigger systems. When I give the word, you're really going to bring down the mountain. If that's what it takes to make sure the evidence we released has time to take effect. Her voice carried absolute resolve. David died for this information. I'm not letting his sacrifice be meaningless because we weren't willing to make the hard choice when it mattered. Through the monitors, they could see additional assault teams positioning at other tunnel entrances, preparing for coordinated strikes that would overwhelm any conventional defensive position. But Willa's preparations had been anything but conventional. All teams prepare for synchronized assault, came the command through intercepted radio traffic. Target appears to be single defensive position with limited fields of fire. Willa smiled grimly. Time to show them how wrong they are about everything. Her hands moved to controls that would activate defensive systems these professional soldiers had never encountered. Ready, Jesse? The coordinated assault that followed was unlike anything Jesse had ever witnessed. Professional military forces, moving with textbook precision, only to discover that textbooks hadn't prepared them for a mountain fortress designed by someone who understood their tactics better than they did. Willa's response was swift and devastating. The avalanche charges didn't bring down the entire mountain. They reshaped it, sealing strategic tunnel entrances while opening others, turning familiar terrain into a maze that favored the defender absolutely. Jesus Christ, came a voice through the intercepted radio traffic. Half our entry points just disappeared. Bravo team, report status. Bravo team is cut off, command. Tunnel system has been altered. We need new extraction routes. Jesse watched through the remaining surveillance monitors as assault teams found themselves trapped in sections of tunnel that had become tactical nightmares. Willa had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, creating a defensive network that could adapt to any assault strategy. But the decisive moment came when Jesse spotted movement on a monitor that Willa hadn't seen. A specialized team moving through natural cave systems that bypassed her tunnel defenses entirely. Willa, north approach. They found a way around your main defensive line. She turned to look, and Jesse saw recognition flicker across her features. The approaching team was led by Mitchell himself, moving with the confident precision of someone who had studied this terrain as carefully as she had. He's been planning this for longer than just a few days, she realized. They've had surveillance on this mountain for months, maybe longer. Jesse reached for his rifle, but Willa stopped him with a gesture. Instead, she moved to a final control panel he hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to connect to systems throughout the mountain's defensive network. "There's something I didn't tell you about David's final message," she said, her voice carrying a weight that spoke of secrets held for 10 years. "He didn't just leave me evidence of the corruption. He left me something else." She activated the panel, and Jesse heard machinery throughout the mountain coming to life. Not defensive systems, but something else entirely. Through the monitors, he could see Mitchell's team suddenly stopping their advance, clearly hearing the same sounds. "What is that?" "David's final gift to me, and his final revenge against the people who killed him." Willa's smile was fierce with vindication. "A complete recording system that's been documenting everything that's happened on this mountain for the past 48 hours. Jesse understood immediately. Every word Mitchell said, every federal agent who's participated in this assault, every illegal order, all recorded, all being broadcast live to the networks I activated earlier. Willa's voice carried quiet satisfaction. "They came here to silence us, but instead they've provided evidence of their own crimes to a global audience." The impact was immediate. Through intercepted communications, they could hear commanders receiving new orders, voices carrying the urgency of people who had suddenly realized their operation was being watched by the world. "All teams, abort assault. Repeat, abort current. Operation and withdraw to perimeter positions." But Mitchell's voice came through clearly, refusing the order. "Command, target is still active and evidence is still being transmitted. Mission completion takes priority." Jesse watched as the professional soldier made a choice that revealed everything about the stakes involved. Mitchell was continuing his advance despite orders to withdraw, despite knowing the world was watching, because the people he served valued this secret more than his life or career. "He's not stopping," Jesse said. "Then neither am I." Willa moved to a final position. 1. That would give her a clear shot at the natural cave entrance Mitchell was approaching. But Jesse could see it would also expose her to return fire from his team. There has to be another way. "The recording system will keep broadcasting for 6 more hours, even if we're both dead," she said quietly. "The evidence is safe. The conspiracy is exposed, and justice will eventually be served. But Jesse, don't talk like we're not both walking away from this." She turned to look at him, and Jesse saw in her eyes the love that had grown between them alongside something he recognized from his own military service. The calm acceptance of someone prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for a cause larger than themselves. "If something happens to me, promise me you'll make sure David's story gets told correctly. Not as a casualty of war, but as a hero who died protecting democracy from its own corruption. Promise me you're not planning to get yourself killed proving a point. I'm planning to end this the only way it can end, with the truth completely exposed and the people responsible held accountable." She raised Jesse's grandfather's Colt 45, the weapon that had been passed down through generations of men who'd fought for justice. One way or another, the final confrontation was seconds away, and Jesse knew that everything they'd shared, everything they'd fought for, was about to be decided by whoever was faster, more accurate, and more determined to survive. 6 months later, Willa stood on the porch of their rebuilt cabin, watching Jesse work with the recovery team that was still cataloging evidence from the mountain. The confrontation with Mitchell had ended not with gunfire, but with federal marshals arriving to arrest him on live television as the world watched. The recording system Willa had activated had done more than expose the conspiracy. It had forced immediate federal intervention to preserve what remained of institutional credibility. The new cabin sat in the same clearing as the old one, but everything else had changed. Where once she had lived in isolation, now there was a steady stream of visitors, journalists, congressional investigators, families of the 17 people who had been murdered to protect the mineral extraction. Conspiracy. The mountain that had been her refuge had become a symbol of resistance against government overreach. Jesse emerged from the workshop they'd built together, carrying 2 simple gold rings they'd forged themselves from recovered mining gold found in the old tunnel systems. The metal had come from the very deposits that had made them targets, transformed now into symbols of the love that had grown from their shared trials. "Ready?" he asked, offering her one of the rings. "I've been ready since the moment I kissed you," she replied, taking the ring and examining its simple, honest craftsmanship. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect our wedding rings to be made from the same gold that nearly got us killed. Seemed appropriate, taking something that represented greed and corruption and turning it into something that represents love and commitment." Jesse slipped his ring onto his finger, and Willa noticed how natural the gesture looked. "Besides, after everything we've been through, I wanted our rings to be something we made together." The ceremony was simple. Just the 2 of them, standing where they'd first met, exchanging vows that acknowledged not just their love for each other, but their shared commitment to the principles that had brought them together. No officiant was necessary. They'd been tested by circumstances that proved their partnership more thoroughly than any religious or legal ceremony could. "I promise to stand with you against whatever comes next," Willa said, sliding her ring into place. "And there's definitely going to be a what comes next." She was referring to the congressional hearings scheduled to begin the following month, where their testimony would be crucial to prosecuting the largest government corruption case in American history. 18 people had already been indicted, including 3 Pentagon officials and the entire executive leadership of Meridian Development Corporation. The mineral extraction conspiracy had unraveled completely, taking down networks of corruption that had operated for decades. "I promise to keep you grounded when all this attention gets overwhelming," Jesse replied, "and to make sure we don't lose ourselves in fighting other people's battles." It was a necessary promise. Since the story broke, they'd been approached by dozens of organizations wanting their help exposing other conspiracies, other cover-ups, other instances where government power had been abused for private profit. The temptation to become professional whistleblowers was strong, but both of them understood the importance of returning to the life they'd chosen together. "Think we'll ever have a quiet life?" Jesse asked, looking out over the mountain that had become famous worldwide. "Define quiet. If you mean, will we ever go back to complete isolation? Probably not. Too many people know where to find us now." Willa smiled, gesturing to the various vehicles parked near their cabin. "But if you mean, will we eventually have time to just be married couples who happen to live on a mountain? I think so." The evidence David had died protecting was now part of the public record. The Overwatch network that Willa had helped build was transitioning from a secretive resistance organization to a legitimate advocacy group. Most importantly, the precedent they'd set that ordinary citizens could successfully challenge government corruption if they were prepared to risk everything was inspiring similar efforts around the country. "Any regrets?" Jesse asked, "about exposing the conspiracy?" "Never. About marrying a man I'd known for less than 24 hours. Willa considered the question seriously. I should have regrets about that. Everything I know about relationships says we moved too fast, committed too quickly, risked too much on too little information. But sometimes life presents you with choices that bypass all the normal rules. Sometimes you meet someone and you just know. This is the person I've been waiting for. This is the partnership I've been preparing for my entire adult life. She took his hand, feeling the new ring warm against his skin. David taught me that love is always a risk, and the only question is whether the person is worth the risk. You were worth it, Jesse. You're still worth it. The sound of an approaching helicopter interrupted their moment, another journalist or investigator arriving to document their story. But for the first time since the confrontation 6 months ago, neither of them tensed at the sound of aircraft. The world's attention had shifted from hunting them to protecting them, and the mountain that had once been a fortress was becoming something entirely different. "What do you think this place becomes now?" Jesse asked, watching the helicopter land in the clearing they'd designated for such visits. "I think it becomes whatever we choose to make it." Willa squeezed his hand, feeling the solid weight of their new beginning. A home built by two people who learned that sometimes the most important fights are the ones you never expected to have. Jesse kissed her, a gesture that carried all the promise of the future they were building together. Around them, the mountains stretched toward peaks that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to partners, to symbols of resistance, to married couples planning a lifetime together. The helicopters would keep coming. The investigations would continue, and their story would be told and retold by people who needed to believe that individuals could still make a difference against overwhelming odds. But beneath all of that, simpler and more important, was the truth that love could grow from the most unlikely circumstances and endure the most extraordinary tests. They were home, finally and completely, in a place they'd helped each other build and defend. The